And welcome into another post-podcast edition of Spits and Suds. We truly appreciate your support, especially under these circumstances. Wow, tough one to watch today. Matinee, we were all excited. Stars fall to the Jets by the score of 4-1. And with that win, the Winnipeg Jets make history, becoming the first NHL team to win 14 out of their first 15 games. I'm Gavin Spittle of 105.3 The Fan, and I'm joined by my good friend David Castillo. You can catch him on Twitter. You can also read his Substack at Starstack, and you can also catch his work in D Magazine. David, how are you this afternoon?
I'm doing good. Obviously, better than you. It sounds like you've also fallen to your immune system.
I was almost a healthy scratch or an unhealthy scratch, but going to fight through it because I think it's important to do these podcasts.
All right. Well, just like a true hockey player, you have fought through it, and I appreciate it. And I would just say, it's the game today. There are going to be a lot of things we can kind of talk about, and it looks like we got like some really good questions on social media. I mean, it's like I've been a major skeptic of the Winnipeg Jets. To me, you break down their numbers, and a lot of it is just absolute nonsense. It's just like absurd. Yep. Like one of the best power plays in the last like 17 years, a top 10 team in like even strength scoring in the last 17 years. And you're like, this is not one of the best rosters for the last 17 years. And man, they looked like it today. And I was
absolutely, David. And when you look at the roster, it's not like they're like, all right, we're going to add Steven Stamkos, we're going to add Jonathan Marchessault like Nashville did, or we're going to add all this firepower. Essentially, it was a coaching change, some parts thrown in there, but all of a sudden, former star Vladimir Nemestikov becomes like a really good player. That third line, that all of a sudden they become 4 lines deep. They're just a completely different Winnipeg Jets team. As for the Stars, David, I did a little spits and studs. Oh, Jesus. Now that's a good podcast, Spits and Studs. I did a little spits and suds analytic breakdown. And here's my point. It's early, David, but your victories have been against the Predators, the Islanders, the Kraken, the Sharks, the Oilers, the Bruins, and twice against the Blackhawks. Total record of these teams, 43, 63, and 10.
Yeah.
Capitals, Buffalo, Florida, Winnipeg, 49, 18, and 4. You have not beat a team with a winning record yet.
Also, real quick, I do want to back up because Winnipeg did make a big change, which was Scott Arniel, right? I mean, it's the kind of thing. Well, I mean, to me, this is, and I'm not here to like take shots at Bowness, but like, Rick Bowness famously was a coach that really kind of depressed, offensive systems because that wasn't his priority. And Arniel, conversely, by the way, had an analytics summit for the Winnipeg Jets. There's a big story in The Athletic about it. Winnipeg have a fantastic beat writer who talked all about it. So I just want to say this is a win for analytics. Gavin, I want you to acknowledge it and appreciate that analytics basically was responsible for the victory.
Well, but I do appreciate analytics yes. And I do give Scott Arniel credit. My only thing is if I'm a Winnipeg Jets fan, and I'm excited, especially if the Winnipeg Blue Bombers win tonight. I'm really excited. But you look at this Winnipeg Jets team and you think back to last year, David, there has to be a little part of you that says, okay, Scott Arniel, he's the man. But wait a minute, he was on our bench last year. Why didn't we use this?
By the way, can we just say also, like, there's a bit like all of me that says the Jets, they will come back down to earth.
Of course.
Because you have players like Neil Pionk and Adam, like they were just like Mason Appleton, right? Some of these guys have more points than Hintz and Robertson. Yes, we can talk about like Hintz and Robertson struggles, but even Hintz and Robertson at 40% are not, less productive players than Neil Pionk, stay-at-home defenseman his entire career, and Mason Appleton, a bottom six forward his entire career. So it's gonna, the Chickens will listen. They look fantastic, and it's obviously idiotic for me to say like, this team's not for real when they looked absolutely brilliant. But I'm going to be a skeptic until they prove otherwise. However, that's not to say that, man, you were talking about all the teams that, that Dallas didn't even outplay a lot of those teams that have horrible records. And that to me was always the worrying sign. And one of the reasons why I didn't mind the Florida losses, because I thought they played relatively well. But I think at this point, you can start to ask, quote unquote, the hard questions, right? The early hot takes, because I think we are seeing, listen, the Thanksgiving cutoff is coming up, and Dallas is going to pass that cutoff, which is what 77% of the teams that are in a playoff position at the time of Thanksgiving go on to make the playoffs. However, that says nothing about how good they're going to be in the playoffs once they get there, and it's not looking great.
Right. Okay, so let's take this. You play Pittsburgh next. Pittsburgh is 6-8-2. Then you play Boston 7-7-1. And then you play a team with a winning record in the Minnesota Wild. So, to me, you can beat Pittsburgh and you can beat Boston. You might lose, but I mean, if you beat those two games, I want to see you go into Minnesota and win.
No, 100%. I mean, and Minnesota is a lot like Winnipeg, right? This is a team that, which, by the way, did say, I got to stop this "I told you so" kind of method of argument. I promise I will. But I've always said, while they've had great underlying numbers, they had just historically bad goaltending last year, but the defense has been elite. And so to me, Minnesota is kind of like the inverse of Winnipeg, where Winnipeg, I think, is still just kind of a hot hand team that's also very good. Minnesota is a hot hand team that has been very good a little bit longer. And so I kind of wouldn't be surprised if you see a similar result. And I think at that point, you're really going to be like, okay, who exactly is this Stars team? Because even though they should beat Minnesota, I'm not confident they can, because I think the Wild are legit. I think the Central Division is not. I think the Central Division is not legit compared to, say, other divisions. But these two teams are looking very legit, while Dallas looks very much like they're just lagging behind.
Well, I also think Minnesota is one of those teams that if some things hit, that they would rebound nicely. And one of those massive hits is Kirill Kaprizov coming back. And now with 27 points, he's a beast. I mean, we're talking possible MVP early season candidate. It's really, really early. But the fact that he's back and playing like he is, I mean, that's a huge jolt for an offense that has historically struggled in the last few years. But back to the Stars. I mean, I mentioned Kaprizov because, and I'm not trying, I don't want to become dramatic, David, but at the same time, when will we see a player on this team in a big situation step up big?
I mean, can we just say they don't have it? I mean, exactly. I honestly think, and this is, and by the way, this is not necessarily like a doom cast. If it is, so be. This is what fans.
It's a realistic cast.
Yes. Well, okay, that too. But I mean, it's it's okay to overreact after one game, because hey, that's the whole point, right? The game just happened. They just lost. You're not going to be in the most kind of ultra objective, hyper rational states of mind. So that's Dallas. I mean, you look at a lot of the game, and they just don't have jailbreakers. They don't have the Kucherov, like you said, the Kaprizov. They don't have the McKinnon, and I think if Dallas is looking for that, then they're going to be looking for a while unless they trade for it, because they just and even a couple seasons ago when you had Robertson, Hintz, and Pavelski all clicking. Listen, they were playing at a high level because all three of them were clicking at the same time. It wasn't oh, well, Hintz would just take over an entire shift, or Robertson would take over. They could capitalize on plays. But I mean, they could not in any way run game the way the way someone like McDavid or McKinnon could, or even someone like Barkov. Like Barkov was a player that just absolutely destroyed single-handedly the Stars in Finland, and that was the thing to me that like my main takeaway, which is that like, hey, I think Dallas played really well. I think they probably deserved a split in that series. However, the big difference was Barkov, 5 points, 2 games, and just dominating from shift to shift. And Dallas still trying to figure out, what their real top line is besides Duchesne, Sagan, and Marchment, which, if we're being again objective and realistic, that's not a line that's not your top line. That's not a top line on any serious contender. And I think if Duchesne is able to like maintain like this pace, great. But that is not, I mean, they're probably not going to do that, right? I mean, let's just face facts, right? I mean, it's not just about age. It's also about, well, I mean, Sagan is putting up absurd even strength numbers, and that's also going to, kind of fall back down to earth. So,
yeah. I mean, I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated by a couple of things. Now, when Robert joined us the other night, Robert, rightfully so, because he's right on this, but that doesn't mean we still can't get frustrated, because he says he's frustrated as well. He said the following: what can they do to fix this power play? What do you expect them to do? What moves would you like them to make? And it is interesting when you think it's like all you can really do is change up the players. But at the same time, the fact that your first power play shot occurred late in the third period when you were down 4-0, come on. Like, that is just, I don't care if they're blocking shots. The reason they're blocking shots, in my opinion, is because there is no threat from the point. There's not enough puck movement. So therefore, if you rewatch this game, and if you can remember watching this game, look at how aggressive Winnipeg was as far as rushing to the point and getting into the corners. They didn't even act like there was a power play. They didn't even get in a box. It was just as if it was a 5-on-5 situation.
Yeah, no, and so for me, I think one of the things, when you look at Winnipeg's power play as well, and gotta wonder if Scott Arnell, that analytics summit. By the way, I'm going to stop doing this because I know that's like super annoying to a lot of people who are like, we don't want to need to hear about like histograms and regression analysis and all that crap. Nobody cares, and I get it. A lot of times I don't either. However, you look at their power play, and so much of how they just absolutely dummied what is a really good power penalty kill unit in Dallas is a lot of rotation, switching up the formations, just maintaining that movement without sort of moving too much. And that's something you don't see Dallas do at all. Like, you're never seeing it. They're not rotating. They're not switching formations. And then, of course, there's the whole like point shot nonsense, which, and again, I'm someone that's optimistic about the power play, just kind of just by sheer, getting lucky, right? They're gonna, some of those, bounce. They're gonna get a few bounces eventually. However, certain things they can avoid, like the point shots, specifically point shots from Heiskanen. We've had this discussion before as well, and they just got to stop. It's not gonna work. Heiskanen is not that type of player. He never will be that type of player, and so. Normally, I would say like, hey, get Harley on the top unit. Listen, Harley's been struggling himself, and I think a lot of it's been kind of decision making. But I would much rather see either Harley on the top unit, whatever the hell the top unit is, and then maybe even tinker with 5 forwards. I mean, like, your defensemen, just recognize that your defensemen are not like, they're not Cale Makars, they're not Josh, like, they're not elite offensive defenseman, which is fine. You don't necessarily have to have that. Like, Florida didn't have that.
Right.
So in lieu of that, why not just try 5 forwards? I mean, I think that would be like a start.
Yeah. All right. So the hate can come to at GJ Spittle, and this is a really bad thing. And this is when you're like, wow, Gavin must be like, he really is honest, because he's going to hurt his following and the number of downloads on his podcast. When I say the following, is Miro Heiskanen right now the 4th or 5th best defenseman in the Central Division? He's
No,
not
I
better than
mean,
Josh Morrissey.
it's not so not well. I mean, I would say like Morrissey has really only been elite for like 2 seasons, so we should grant at least that. But you're right,
Okay.
Morris certainly you're not right now, right? Over the last 2 seasons, Morrissey's been better. Cale McCarr's been
Cale
better.
McCarr, Brock Faber.
Oh man, it's honestly I like Jonas Brodin a lot, but
Okay.
Heiskanen's better than him. But still, yeah, I would say right now Faber, even though I wouldn't call him a better player thus far throughout his career, Faber's certainly
Yeah.
on a
I'm just
high.
saying this year.
But okay, yes,
I'm just saying
Faber.
this year. Miro has been terrific. And I still think Miro has terrific in him, but you got to be better. Like, we need to see, we've been talking about Miro Heiskanen taking that next step. And I'll give you another example. And listen, I think Miro Heiskanen over his career is better. But Seth Jones is having a really good year in Chicago. You know, Seth Jones is back to being Seth Jones after being injured a lot. But do I think, would I rather have Miro? Of course I would. So I'm not trying to be a hater. I'm just saying the Stars' defensive core this year has been, minus Anaheim, the worst in the league as far as point production.
Well, I mean, that's kind of also part of by design, right? You know, Jim Neal brought. So I realize we're talking about Heiskanen, but you know, Jim Neal did bring in a defensive additions that specifically counterbalanced,
Right.
Dallas's ability to kind of create
Yep.
offense from the back end. So part
Great
of that
point.
is like, well, hey, it's what is the expression about like, bed, lay, whatever, which is an awful analogy. I apologize, but the point is like they just part of that is I think a collective kind of influence where you don't really, like someone like Sean Walker or Oliver Shillington, like these might have been a little bit more interesting if you wanted offense from your back end.
Sure.
But I agree that Heiskanen is just really, I think there's that element of, well, he's never going to be the defenseman that people want him to be.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is okay. However, now we're kind of seeing, well, when you have that in addition to no offensive support anywhere else from the blue line,
Right.
well, then you get this effect, which is just the worst parts of the Bible stuff.
And by the way, and I said, I hope he proves me wrong, but this is why I'm glad Harley was on a short-term deal. And I really like Thomas Harley as a player. But if Thomas Harley keeps this up, I don't want to spend $8 million a year on him. And it's like, listen, this is a short. I'm just expressing what I see so far this season. That doesn't mean like I think this long term, because they could turn it around. I just think in big game situations, where's Jason Robertson? Where's Rope Hintz? Where are these? Where's Miro? Where's Harley? What's going on? It's just, yeah, I'll give you credit. I think one of them was on Jake Ottinger today, and that was the Ehlers up the middle, but even that was a one-timer. Listen, that one that slipped behind his glove by Nemestikov, if you go back and look, that's Jamie Benn putting his stick there, and Ottinger could not get his glove down fully. I've watched it several times, and I truly believe that's the factor.
Well, I mean, yeah, like for Ottinger's performance, like I don't there were several goals just right on his doorstep.
Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't really have a problem with his game, but I mean, if we're talking about like some of the kind of lack of offense from the blue line, to be honest, I think it starts with, and this is one of the things I'm going to write about in D Magazine on that's going to go up on Tuesday, which is I think one of the big, I know, right, a little seamless plug there. I think one of the biggest things is the forwards, right? Just the lack of, and before anybody says, hey, but some injuries have disrupted some of the line chemistries and some like, yes, injuries have played a factor, but when you look at Dallas's man games lost compared to the rest of the league, they don't have a problem. Like, nobody's out long term. That's not a good excuse. So for me, I think more than anything, what's hurting this team more than anything is the lack of chemistry among the forward trios.
Yeah.
Like they have one line that has been able to score a lot, but that's it. And so the fact that they're still trying to figure out, like, what do we do with Wyatt Johnston? What do we do with Rupert Hintz is kind of a big deal. And I think that to me has been, I think the source, not necessarily the primary source, but one of the primary sources of their struggles.
Right. You ready to get into some Twitter? You guys also asked some questions on David's Substack, so we'll get to that as well. And I would recommend subscribing to David's Substack. He's terrific at writing, and you can read his articles in D Magazine, and he does a deeper dive on his Substack.
Let's do it.
What's that?
Oh, no, I just said let's do it.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And man, I wonder if I'm like in this like feisty mood because of my cold. I'm not sure. Nick Sellers says, "Is it time we had some hard conversations or reassessed our expectations of anyone?" I think we're doing that right now. I think David brought up a great point. And we also heard from Connor Rabchuk yesterday when he gave us that Winnipeg preview. We got to wait till Thanksgiving. It's coming soon, but that's a really good kind of, if you want to look at a landmark date right around there as far as where these teams sit. Christopher DeHardy, he says, "Live look at me after the game," and it's a bird that says me on it and big sip, and the drink he's drinking says unsea juice. I like that. Very, very clever, my friend. Very clever. Let's see. James D says, "How much of this performance is on the coaching staff? The guys look flat, out, confused at some point. The Stars are the third team this has happened to. So logic would suggest that he is the issue." I know every time, David, that there is something in the loss column or the team's not playing well, immediately they throw it on the coach, and especially when that coach hasn't been able to take teams to the promised land. But that said, I don't know. I mean, I didn't see we're on when Pete DeBoer does his press conference, but I'm sure he's not happy tonight that his team did not show up.
I mean, like for me, I'm cool with it because I think coaches are like fair game. But I mean, I would not at all say like, DeBoer. I mean, the one thing I would say, like, I guess as a kind of a real sort of soft criticism of DeBoer is that I do think he's had time to figure out some of these lines and still just doesn't seem, for me, I think one of the biggest things, and this is not like, oh, and I know better, let me like get into armchair coach mode or anything like that, just that philosophically, right? I do think that if the logic that we can't break up Duchesne, Marchment, and Seguin is that, well, they're too good together, then why does it break down just because, hey, Duchesne with, say, Bork, which they got a little bit of time together like a couple games ago. And, to me, I just feel like if you're going to line juggle, then everyone should be fair game. Yeah. And even though, yes, Steele scored the other day on the Duchesne line, he's not a top six forward. Right. And so I would like to see, even someone like Blackwell get a look in the top six. There hasn't been a rhyme or reason to the line juggling. I think it's kind of like part of my issue. But
you know what, Blackwell, I think I'm interested to see more minutes of Blackwell. I like his energy. And to me, it's like, I think this team needs an energetic guy. This will not play into analytics, David, but hockey sometimes, every single time a Stars player even got around Hellebuck, what happened when the whistle was blown?
They had jets in their face.
They had jets in their face. I'm just saying, like, they protect that man. And you saw when Matt Dumba went over to protect, Matt Dumba had two guys. You can't do that. You need guys, and you gotta be tough. And listen, I know it's a different game and everything, but those are the things that I notice. Those are the small things. And late in the game, I thought Jamie Benn wanted to get kicked out of that game personally. He wanted to get an early shower.
Real quick, can I just say, in response to what you said, which is that, isn't there a little bit of a sort of hockey connection there, which is that, well, part of why Winnipeg has players in their opponent's face is also like good positioning. Dallas hasn't had like the greatest position. So sometimes like they're just not in great position to defend their goalie's honor.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You are absolutely right. Let's see. Fuzzy says, my opinion, oof, that's a dang good team. Yeah, I mean, boy, Winnipeg came out flying, and they're a fun team to watch. Otis Campbell says, please let us quit playing day games. And he also says Harley has digressed. They beat Edmonton in a matinee, so that's not too bad. Yeah, I was hoping this year we would see the offensive prowess of Thomas Harley, and hopefully we will see that as the season moves along, David.
Well, I think another thing too is like consistency, right? Which is, consistency with one, I think who he's paired with. Like Harley is, bounced around a little bit. Like, right,
Yeah.
sometimes they put him back with Heiskanen, and then sometimes you see him, I think most of the season he's been with Lyubushkin, but then every now and then you see him with Dumba. And so I think there's a little bit of that kind of feeding into, also just the lack of decision making. Um, Again, he made like a really strange choice the other day, and I think it was on the power play where just had an open man and just decided to kind of just shoot it from a really sharp angle. And I was like, huh? I don't, and it was after a ton of great footwork, which almost seems like he's doing too much. I feel like he's getting skating lessons from Antonio Strangis. And I'm like, enough, dude, like, hey, that it doesn't work for Strangis either. So Harley, please, the 10-2 C-step stuff, knock it off, man.
That is funny. All right. Eden Shadlow. At E Shadlow, seeing a few people blame DeBoer for this performance and point out that he has never managed to have Stanley Cup success despite coaching very talented teams. Is this just reactionary, or is there something to be concerned about? Also, does DeBoer's relationship with Smott play a role here? The power play has been atrocious outside of the Boston game, but DeBoer would be very unlikely to support Spott's removal from his role. That's a great point, Eden. They are extremely close. They've been together at multiple coaching locations. So, yes, I believe he would have a problem with it. My issue is the following, David, is that this was a concern late last year heading into the playoffs. And then the playoffs, the power play was really bad. In the preseason, it was. So we've seen a lengthy power play drought. So my thing is, at what point can they at least just change something? I know that you can't. Well, I guess the question is these are professionals. Why couldn't you throw a couple of wrinkles in? Is it lack of practice time?
Right. Well, I mean, isn't that something that like sort of, NHL teams kind of famously don't sort of do a whole lot, throughout within the season, right? So within the season, you don't like, it's not like teams are practicing every day, once they get into the groove of the schedule. And so naturally kind of, I think things like special teams maybe kind of fall a little bit by the wayside. But I think again, like I go back to, you look at Dallas's power play under Spot, at least in the regular season. For the
Right.
most part, they put up really solid numbers, right? Top 10 team across the board, whether it's shot attempts, expected goals, etc. And yes, has it been different in the playoffs under Spot across multiple teams? Yes. I don't. I still don't think that you're at the point where we necessarily need to kind of overreact, because again, I think some of this stuff is also kind of player driven. Like, I mean, a lot of this, and I also think some things will just naturally change. Like Robertson is not going to shoot 0% or whatever he's at on the power play, and same thing with Wyatt Johnson. I just think some of these players are too talented, and again, still too early for something as small as the amount of time that you even spend on a power play throughout a whole game to begin with.
Yeah, that makes sense. Chris Barnard says Dallas is good, not elite. They need to upgrade D, and they need a game breaker in top 6, which means a trade is needed. Something substantial to get them to that next level. Am I crazy for thinking I'd move Hintz, Miro? Lindell just signed. Harley isn't fetching the same return.
I mean, it's where, like, how much time do we, I mean, do we have, we would need like 10 podcast episodes for just to like, for this discussion alone. I mean, it's not going to happen, right? I mean, they already, they already improved, quote unquote, improved the blue line the way they felt like they wanted, which is, hey, we want a blue line that's going to be tougher and make it harder on opposing forwards. And I don't really, I do think like just a big, massive, dramatic hockey trade is probably exactly what Dallas is going to need. I was having that discussion in the Discord. It was kind of one of the things I didn't like too much about, and this is so you contributed to lack of downloads. I'm going to help you get even less by saying that was one of the things that I didn't like all that much about extending Lindell and Ottinger. And I'm not criticizing both players. I'm not saying they're both bad. Just that by doing so, they kind of locked Dallas into a core that I think still has a few question marks. Like I still believe this is an elite team. However, there are still questions, right? There have always been questions about whether or not Dallas has a true number one forward. Certainly a jailbreaker they do not have. The blue line absolutely needs improvement. It needed improvement last season. You kind of got it in Tanev. You lost him, and then you replaced it with a bunch of warm bodies. Which, again, I think Lyubushkin has been like fine, but he's not an impact player.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see maybe if they try to switch it up and bring up Bischel at some point. But they have 7 guys on guaranteed contracts, so we'll see. To that point, Michael Moore did ask me prior to the game, do you see the Stars going after a Zegras type for the top line, seeing they need one more scorer? Trevor Zegras is slumping mightily for the Ducks right now. Makes about $5.5 million, and he has this year and next year. David, I've always liked him as a player. I think he's uber talented. The question was if in Anaheim would expect a lot, and is this a temporary thing? But I mean, we are kind of going on close to a year and a half or a year and a quarter of Zegras not playing well.
I mean, I forgot what Anaheim's like defensive core looks like, but I'm wondering if you couldn't make something around like a sort of cap dump with Thomas Harley for like Zegras with the assumption that like Big Cell would just kind of come up and kind of take his place. I am not advocating for that trade at all. I'm just kind of working out in my head kind of how it might work.
Trades are fun to talk about. Yeah, here it is. They have defensive pairings. Jackson Lacombe, Olin Zellweger, Uro Vakanayan. Did I say that right? I think I did. Our friend Radko Gudas, Pavel Mitirov, and Brian Dumoulin, because Cam Fowler is out right now.
That's right. So Cam Fowler is going to be on the trading block, which kind of I think would incentivize a team like Anaheim to look for a left-handed. I think the only thing is like Zegras, he is exactly what Dallas needs and not what Dallas needs. Where great playmaker, which is exactly what Dallas needs. Dallas doesn't really have that. Like I feel like not enough people kind of talk about the fact that Dallas doesn't really have true blue playmakers, which is part of why I think the hype on Maverick Bourque was so high, because he kind of fit that profile. But he also doesn't. However, like Zegras still is a player that struggles defensively, and so I mean, like where do you want that kind of presence in the lineup?
Yeah.
Like, lower in the lineup would kind of be perfect, but I mean that's not why you trade for him, right? And that's not why you trade time assets for that.
Well, I'll tell you a player that interests me, and he's very young, and you'd have to give up like a Harley or something. Mason.
Okay, what Utah player?
No.
Okay.
By the way, have you watched Michael Kesselring lately?
Okay, hold on. You mentioned Mason McTavish.
I like Mason McTavish. I like his grit.
It's.
You're seeing like a pattern, aren't you?
I'm seeing a pattern. I'm starting to realize, like, I don't just disagree with this pattern, Gavin. I actively despise it, and so this is going to be our dynamic from now on.
It's like someone. I felt so bad the other day. I deleted it because somebody asked me about what it would take to go to Ottawa and get Brady Tkachuk. So I responded I thought I was retweeting him with my response, but I was just throwing out there. And I'm like, here's what a Brady Kachuk look. And all of a sudden the responses are like, what do you know? What are you hearing? Are you just throwing this out there? And I was like, no. But like, I'll give up my whole team for a Kachuk. I love the Kachucks because they're physical. They're around the blue paint. They don't mind dropping the mitts. They bring the energy every game. I just like the Kachucks, and they're winners.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, this is a discussion that needed to be had like 2 years ago when Robertson was at his absolute height, and I think people even had that discussion. I think there was. I remember reacting to like, "Hey, would you do Jason Robertson for Brady Kachuk?" And Kachuk didn't have like a big season at the time, and I remember thinking like, "Yeah." I mean, you can look at the receipts on Twitter. Like, I remember thinking, "Yeah," just because to me, like Kachuk has all of, especially Brady, very similar to his brother, has even though he's not like, even though they're not speedsters, they have the DNA and the kind of sort of sauce, the kind of barbecue sauce of those jailbreak type players, where they can just absolutely take over a shift. And to be fair, I think Robertson, like the elements are still there, but man, he's struggled this year, and some of the passing, especially, has been kind of atrocious, man. And it almost kind of makes me wonder. I'm not there yet, but it is tough to watch at times, and you kind of do wonder, like, well, how much of the Robertson from 2 years ago
was Pavelski,
and even the year before that, was just kind of that magical conjunction with Hintz and Pavelski all operating on all.
Yeah, it's
all
a great question. Really, really is. And let me just say, we bring these questions up because we care. We want the Stars to do well. We want this team. I want to be popping Frosties, even though I'm sick. I want to be popping them, but I just guess I'll stick to tea tonight.
That surprises me, man. You have the voice of a hard-boiled neo-noir detective right now, and so for you to talk about like sipping tea is just really confusing to me.
Yeah, I know. I had a man card and I lost it. Blackout Dallas. What is it with playoff opponents and the Stars not playing at the same level? The Stars also need some energy in the first period. Yeah, I mean, man, it's frustrating because they came out the other night, and I mean, granted, it was against the Hawks. You could have said jet lag. You could have made. I was legitimately throwing out excuses like I don't know what my expectations are, and I thought they really came out flying. And once again tonight, or what we saw in the first game against Finland, just first period of just unforced errors and getting pressed, and like, you knew Winnipeg was great on the power play and you took penalties. I mean, they might have been bad calls. The Sagan call was ridiculous, but yeah. All right. Do you like this feisty Gavin, David?
The feisty Gavin is fantastic, especially like feisty Gavin with like the lifetime of cigarettes and whiskey that he's just consumed that allow him to sound that way. One last thing though about the whole sort of like playoff performance is that again, like I don't think Dallas was that bad against Florida, right? So if Dallas wins one game against Florida, like the perception probably kind of changes. But also I think just kind of we should kind of just accept the fact that Dallas right now is not at that level, and also these Florida and Winnipeg they are two teams right really at the top of their game right now, right?
Yeah.
So and by the way, I didn't think Dallas looked that great against Chicago. At least there was a period where they were getting, like I described it as sloppy dominance on Twitter, and that I think was fitting. Yes, they dominated, but a team like Chicago, you need to dominate without any asterisks. I thought there were like a few asterisks, just like with some of like the passing sequences at times. But listen, we're not going to linger. Again, this is not a Doomcast, But I just wanted to throw that out there. Like, I wasn't that
No,
impressed.
absolutely. Hunter says, as early as it is, they might not be as good as we thought. Haven't beaten a team with a winning record. A lot of our stars haven't shown up, i.e., Johnston, Miro, Robertson. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about them all, Hunter. Those are great, great perception by you. Some injuries haven't helped, but it's disappointing. Yeah, I mean, I really would like to see, boy, Mason Marchment, tough luck this year. I give it to the guy, man. He gets banged up a lot, and that was just a tough puck to get hit in the face with.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, he plays that kind of game though, right? He plays the kind of game where there's a good chance he's going to miss more games, whether in the regular season or the playoffs, because the dude he loves being, in a fight in the mud for a knife, right? And so,
right,
not terribly surprised.
Yeah. As Smither Jones says, dare I say it? The stars are soft, or is it the desire or lack of compete? So there's a lot of talk in the sports world about not using that word soft. I don't think they're soft. I just don't think they're the most physical team. So I think we need to see a big win. We need to see go into Minnesota and make a statement. Those are the kind of things that we need to see. They have been dominant at home, but you look at the home teams they've played against, and a lot of the big boys haven't come in yet. Some players look like they're going through the motions. I know it's a long season, but you have to make the playoffs before you start resting for the playoffs. Maybe they're just in the middle. I don't know. That's where it stops. So he didn't finish his yeah.
It's okay. Real quick, one thing I would just add to the discussion about like kind of quote unquote soft is that I don't think that's not the word that I think really kind of helps articulate the actual issue, which is assertiveness, right? That is what Dallas lacks. And it's not just like a physicality thing, it's also a systems thing, right? We've talked a lot about their kind of charity planning, the way they kind of blow the zone sometimes when they have control of the puck. So again, it's not like I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, but I think it says a lot about kind of their mentality, which is that they know that they're limited in some ways. And so in lieu of asserting themselves with just strong tic-tac-toe work, they kind of resort to like schemes and kind of really, try to catch other teams off guard. And I think that's kind of it's a thing that I think can work and has worked. Yeah. And I don't mind it at all, but it's a good example and a good kind of microcosm of listen, they're not like super confident. There's very little chemistry, not just among forward trios, but even on the defense pairs. And that's what you're seeing.
David, you have some questions from your Substack that people have been asking you.
Yeah, so let me ask you first, Gavin. Dante Fabro, which is put on waivers, over Lyubushkin?
It's a really, really good question. What I like is it's a 1-year deal he's on. So, you're not like signing up for something that is going to cost you long term. Decent size. I would say yes. I would say yes. I think Lyubushkin's been fine, but I didn't understand the 3-year contract. I think like once again, like I'm looking at a third pair defenseman really. And I mean, if you told me Lyubushkin or Bichel, I would say Bichel. So like, what are we doing? So I think, yes, I'm good with Dante Fabro. I think he fills some needs.
Well, I think Bichel not being like or Fabro being a right shot and Bichel not, I think it's kind of like, part of the which again, like this goes back to like we're still kind of talking about like improvement at the margins, and I don't think that's what is hurting this team. Like, could they use a little extra? Sure, right. But this is the thing that the Toronto Toronto Maple Leafs had an issue with, and has had an issue with so many years, which is, hey, we've dumped all our money into this core. Now let's try to like fix this, try to get better at the margins. Like, what can we do? And I've always maintained that your issue is that you really needed to switch, one of your for scoring forwards and convert it into, say, like a defenseman or like a number one goalie. And so to me, I think, this kind of Fabro Labushkin, I would say is irrelevant. But here's another question for you, which is that, is it too early? And this is from Andrew S. at the Star Stack. Is it too early to think about what are some trade targets and or cap dumps the Stars should be thinking about? And by the way, they will have, I think, something like 3.6 million per Puckpedia by the trade deadline.
Yeah. I don't know.
Besides Kesselring.
Right. I don't know who you dump. That's the thing, because who wants? I mean, if you really want to go wild card, which Jim Nils says as long as he's GM wouldn't do, then you look to move Jamie Benn. But I mean, that contract's expiring after this year. He's terrific on the draw. He's doing a lot of little things, but after this year, if I'm Jim Nill, I'm like, okay, Jamie, 1 year, $3 million. We're going to give you like similar to a Pavelski deal. So I don't know, David, like who else I would dump that would be of value at this point in the season. One thing you talk about defensively. One thing I might do is, what about moving Esa Lindell up to that first pairing with Heiskanen?
I think the issue with that is that you sort of, right? I mean, so we're kind of, first off, I'm like surprised they haven't like done that. I mean, done it consistently. That would be the kind of first thing I would say, which is that like, yeah, absolutely. Like, why not? But I guess the thing is like, well, here we are again with the whole like left shot, right shot, even though I think we should just kind of, we might have just cut that whole, right? It's not like Dallas is in, right? They didn't draft a right shot defenseman this year, which they had plenty of like great targets. And no, I'm not criticizing the Emil Hemming pick, which yes, I was critical of. I'm just saying, like, if they wanted a right shot defenseman, not that this player would have been ready right away, but like they probably would have been looking at that. They did not. So I don't think and this is not me like speaking from the perspective of an insider, like I really don't think they're thinking about like, hey, we need a right shot defender to pair with Heiskanen specifically. I think it's just they see Heiskanen as a right shot defender. And so, man, I'm not even sure what the question was, where we started with this conversation.
Well, listen, I'm not trying to avoid like dump, but I'm looking right now and I'm like, okay, who would dump that would be worthy of a team picking it up? I mean, you're not going to dump Matt Duchene and he only makes $3 million. I mean, you could Mason Marchment, 4.5 this year, 4.5 next year, but it's not like Marchment's playing bad. He's just can't stay in the lineup. I mean, I personally, just because I think need to switch it out, and this is not an indictment on the player's talent, I think you have to look to move Hintz or Robertson if you want to change the makeup of this team. I know that's like, we love our players, but at the same time, like, it does alleviate cap space. What can I get in return? Because they're big contracts, but those guys have proven that they can do it for a couple of years. So a team is getting value in return. We can't just say, hey, let's dump Tyler Seguin. Well, who wants a $9.85 million contract for the next 2 years after this year? Nobody.
I thought he was like, Seguin only has what, like
he's got this year, obviously, next year, and the year after.
But like, how much in salary?
26, 27, $9.85 million.
Okay. Well, I thought he had like a no move clause or something like that. I guess like I didn't really.
Yeah, no, he does.
Okay,
he does. I'm just throwing it out there.
But yeah, there's really, I mean,
there's really nothing you can do, I guess, besides if you want to throw Esa Lindell. But once again, I believe he has a no movement too.
I think the tough thing is that with the extensions they made this summer, they're really kind of locked into, kind of maintaining sort of status quo with the core that they have. So if they did want somebody at the trade deadline, you could, for example, like dump Dodonov, who I'm not sure I would like because I think he's been fine, but just as an example, like you could dump him And basically what you're doing is you're just paying for a trade deadline, right? Because there's nobody you can trade for that's going to be expensive that you can keep long term unless it's a lateral move that's
Right.
a hockey trade.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. All right. So on Esa Lindell, for clarification, currently on a no movement clause. That turns into a no trade clause, 25, 26, 26, 27, 27, 28. Then it's a modified no trade clause, which means there's a limited amount of teams. So could you do it because that contract does get a little lighter? It still makes it tougher to trade, but you could, after this contract expires, you could do that.
Yeah, it could, but I mean, the organization kind of loves, I mean, that was like always my thing with the whole kind of right shot defender at the draft, which I promise, like, I'm not going to bring up again. I'll shut up about it. But just that I was surprised because I felt like, well, hey, Lindell, he's had a nice run. Probably not the kind of defender that's going to age particularly well. And then they extended him. I'm like, wow, okay, so we're going to roll with Heiskin, Harley, Lindell, Liam Bixel. Like, that's four
Right.
left shot defenders. That's just, it was really strange to me. And I'm sure, there's going to be like some way they can make it work. But I do wonder kind of like, well, what exactly is the plan here in the immediate future? Or do they just feel like, hey, this blue line is good enough and our issue has nothing to do with defense, which I would disagree with, but just saying.
I think they think that Bishop will at least be a top 4 defender. And by the way, I mean, he gets my vote, Esa Lindell, as far as the best of the top 6 this year. So I think he's played really, really well.
Yeah, he's been fantastic. I don't want to
Yeah,
make it sound like I'm
but you're right.
criticizing.
I agree. And this is the thing. Sometimes we get caught up in our own guys and we don't understand. You have to move players. Like, I'll use this. When the Florida Panthers acquired Matthew Tkachuk, they got rid of Jonathan Huberdeau, right?
Right.
Good player.
And
really,
Weegar.
really good player. Was a
Mackenzie Weegar.
100-point player. But sometimes you have to give to get. So Calgary got some nice pieces. It wasn't near what, Tkachuk was that missing piece to take them over the top. So that's why they made that move. But it wasn't like Calgary was getting spare parts. And that's what I'm saying. Like, sometimes you have to move good players. I personally would never move like Bishop, but what are you going to give me for Bishop? I don't know, because he hasn't proven it in the NHL level. And I also think teams now more than ever are looking for assets, AKA draft picks.
Can I just, this is like, again, we're in the sort of subreddit sort of portion of like hockey theory crafting, but I do love that part of hockey. And I would just want to say, yes, there's somebody that I think sort of could potentially make sense if you really made it worth their while, because they're crashing and burning right now. Noah Dobson, big right shot defenseman, also offensively gifted. I think you just, trade him the entire farm, trade the Islanders the entire farm, and maybe Noah Dobson is the guy.
I mean, not bad. Only 24 years old. So, yeah. I mean, it's fun talking trades. It really is. It's fun. What else do we have from your Substack, sir?
Just like to because, well, I'm gonna linger on that point also because there are no more questions, or I think maybe there is, and I'm just not like kind of looking hard enough. But I think the other thing too about like why we're sort of talking, falling down the rabbit hole of kind of trade talk, is that I wonder if this game is, and then again, let's just pretend to be doomers. We're Chicken Little right now. Is this game a kind of an inflection point for when we realize and discover that, damn, this team is really good, but maybe they're not elite with this core. Maybe this core is not what we thought it was.
Right.
Now, again, a lot of that's unfair early in the season. But it's just hard to, especially with the opportunities that players like Johnson and Robertson, and it's not like, Hintz is having a difficult season, but, he also had like, I thought he was fine last season, but it's definitely not the kind of season that I think people thought he would have again. And it's kind of looking like that's going to be the case.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
the reality is you cannot pay every player on your team $7 to $9 million. You just can't. So I think that's what another reason we talk about movement. And sure, it's after a loss, but when you look at the games against Florida and the second game in Florida, I thought they played better. But today as well, it's like, you want your team to go out and you want them to have a quality win. If it's on the road, great. I mean, it wasn't the end all today, David, but it was a nice test. And it was a nice test for Winnipeg. Now, Winnipeg had a big 1-0 win over Colorado the other night. And I was talking to Connor Harabchek about it. And one of the things he said is, yeah, the guys wanted that victory. Hellebuck specifically wanted that victory because Colorado ate him up in the playoffs. But that said, they also wanted the Dallas Stars. They know the Stars right now are the perennial favorites in the Central Division, or, one of the top three. So that to them was a second statement game. They have, we talk about like the Stars, and that's a big test for Winnipeg. And to beat Colorado, I mean, they're sitting pretty right now. But, you look at the Jets' upcoming schedule, and, you had Ottinger. Well, after Ottinger, now you play the New York Rangers and Ilya Shesterkin. And then you have the Tampa Bay Lightning. Pretty good goalie in Vasilevsky if he plays. And then you have the Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers in a back-to-back. So you go Rangers, Lightning, Panthers, and then you're home for the Panthers. That's a tough 4-game stretch coming up for the Jets.
yeah, it's one of the things that I want to be clear, and I'm sure like you agree, which is that like this is not the Doomcast. It's not like, oh man, is Dallas bad actually? No, that's not what we're saying. I think I'm not even interested in whether or not Dallas lost the game today, because same thing with like the Florida game, or the first one at least, where I was like, I thought they played, they generated a lot of chances. They opened the game up against a very, very good team. And to me, that was a better sign. I think what is really like the criticism here for tonight is some of the issues seem like they're going to linger, right? Like some of the, like, for example, with the forward lines and lack of chemistry.
Right.
That seems like a potential long-term, maybe not like a long-term problem that like, reaches some sort of kind of boiling point, or like, cracks start to, but certainly something that we can look at in like a big game that they lose and say, well, there's your reason.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And once again, I think one of the reasons that I love doing this podcast is not just to grow the great game in DFW, but also to have honest opinion. And when a team doesn't play well, we have to talk about this. And hopefully you are listening and you're saying, I'm glad I have two guys on this podcast that are giving like realistic takes, because yeah, I mean that's what we do here. We're not being haters, but we see what we see, and anytime we see it, David, we're just going to say it. Because I know Miro Haskinen's beloved, but he's got to be better. And I think Stars fans have to realize 4 needs to be better. That doesn't mean I hate 4. But what it means is I think he's struggling in multiple areas of his game, might be holding onto the stick too much. Expectations might be too high. I just want, we talked all offseason, free Miro. Put him on his strong side. Well, I'm saying free Miro. Let's just go back to the free skating, confident Miro.
Also, listen to any Spits and Suds listeners that are criticizing you, Gavin Spittle, with all that you've done in terms of growing the game, having all kind, like a really fantastic diversity of guests, covering different aspects of the sport, including guests from other teams. You need to be better as well. Like, I mean, learn the difference between being a hater and just criticism, just normal garden variety criticism. So I do want to defend you there and say that, listen, you can reach out to me on Twitter, call me names. Do not call Gavin Spittle.
And by the way, go back earlier in this week, we talked to Allen American's head coach and director of hockey operations, BJ Adams. Kind of an interesting perspective as the Americans are just about to get underway with Star Wars night. So tonight. So that was a fun interview, and he has coached some amazing players. So to hear the perspective on those players and his perspective on junior hockey, David, just real quick, I think one of the cool things about this interview that I with BJ that I didn't think about, and it's really like simple, but at the same time, because I want the ECHL to also be a feeding ground, because in baseball you have AAA, you have AA. And we're just not seeing that same prospect pool in the ECHL. So it's either jump from juniors or go to college, or, after that, just land immediately in the AHL. So I asked BJ about it, and he said, Gavin, that's not, I loved his answer. He said, really, it's not realistic unless the NHL teams buy the ECHL franchises. And I thought that was really interesting, because if they did, then I think you would see some more players that are under contract with the parent club in the ECHL.
By the way, I think that is slanderous. You know why? Because two elite blue chip prospects in the Dallas Stars farm system, Gavin White and Antonio Stranges, got their little imprisonment time, their timeout in the ECHL. And I think, okay, Gavin White is maybe not like a fantastic, but I like Gavin White's game personally. Antonio Stranges, however, is having a hell of a season right now in the AHL as a point per game player. Granted, he is still every bit as frustrating as all the sort of scouting reports were of him. But, for people that haven't had a chance, I think and I realize we're running out of time, but when Logan Stankoven and Maverick Bourque, graduated, I think for a lot of people, what's going to keep my interest in the Texas Stars in the AHL? And you have your answer, Antonio Stranges. Like, he's a joy to watch for all the best and worst reasons. And ultimately, it's just a lot of fun. So you're not going to hear me say a bad word about the ECHL when they have players like Gavin White and Antonio Stranges in their system.
Yeah. No, I don't. I completely understand. I think the other thing he pointed out was you can only have so many players under contract in your organization, so they would have to expand that. I just thought it was interesting, because to me, I think the ECHL has potential. And it's not like a bad league, but it hasn't turned into a healthy prospect league that I would love to see, like it once was.
And like, I think that's a great point. And even now, you still see like Jemel Smith, right? He was a product of the ECHL, and he had a really nice run with the Stars, for a brief, also with the Tampa Bay Lightning for a brief moment. So, I want to say a few goaltenders, but I'll be honest. Like, my ECHL blind spot is highly prevalent.
Well, you want to see prospect goaltenders then?
Well, I just mean, I feel like there are probably a few more goaltenders that have come from the ECHL than we maybe assume.
Agreed.
Or maybe I could just be.
Like, for instance, backup goalie in the Utah Grizzlies ECHL team, Vinny Duplessis, formerly of Quinnipiac and Boston University, who was a Gavin Spittle pick.
Hold on a second. Is this like an inside joke or something like that? Like, Sean hates here.
It is. Sean hates to see it. He said you will never see this guy. And I am rooting on Vinny Duplessis so hard. When he comes to Allen, he's going to get an interview request from me. Sometimes you have to do the podcast for yourself too, David.
Hey, you know what? That is a philosophy that I adhere to, even at the Star Stack, which is why I wrote an entire piece on Antonio Stranges. And I think for most people, like, who? Especially for Stars fans.
I love it, man. Well, speaking of which, at Stars Stack, Just go to Substack, or you can look it up. I looked it up on Google and just put David Castillo Substack, and it came up immediately. So it's a terrific read. He has pieces coming out on D Magazine, at David Castillo on Twitter/X. David, you are the man. Enjoy your Saturday night, and thank you so much for this fun hour. You are always so much fun to have on the program.
Well, you too, and also Stars fans. You all have a great one as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Stars fans. Listen, it's just one game, and let's go get the Pens on Monday night, and then the Bruins on Thursday. So for David Castillo and for our producer Gregory Finley, who always does such an amazing job, I'm Gavin Spittle of 105.3 The Fan. We'll talk to you soon on Spits and Suds. Have a great day, everyone.